One Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues. There was a woman there who for 18 years had a sickness caused by the spirit of infirmity. She was bent double, quite incapable of standing up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are free of your infirmity." He laid his hands on her, and immediately she stood up straight and began thanking God. The head of the synagogue, indignant that Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, said to the congregation, "There are 6 days for working. Come on those days to be healed, not on the Sabbath." Jesus said in reply, "You hypocrites! Which of you doesn't let your ox or your donkey out of the stall on the Sabbath to water it? This daughter of Sarah and Abraham has been in the bondage of Satan for 18 years. Shouldn't she be released from her shackles on the Sabbath?" At these words, Jesus' opponents were humiliated. Meanwhile, everyone else rejoiced at the marvels Jesus was accomplishing.
Well, that's one way to get ahead of worship today. Or maybe there's a grand sign from above that I should sit down. But I'm going to say a few words anyway, as you suspect. Many commentaries and many Bibles put the heading above this passage as the bent over woman. Well, I think all of us at some point, probably in our lives, have felt a little bent over at times. Some perhaps live a bit bent over, but that is nothing to be ashamed about. For what I love about this story is the woman herself. Now, often when we read this text, we get so involved in it, we worry more about the temple authority, we worry more about doing the miracle, we even worry more about the woman if we can place more burden upon her. For this is how, some ways, we've done it, or Christianity for a while has, is that we place more disability upon her. We sort of rewrite the text or imagine it as we want it to be read. We, first of all, believe that women could not have been in synagogue, for we believe that women are excluded, or Jewish folks at that time excluded women. Folks that had an evil or an infirm spirit, of course, were outside the boundaries of synagogue. Crippled, that you had to be religiously pure. Let me say this, it is all nonsense. For temple and synagogue has always been a place for all people, even for Gentiles. If you would look at the ancient temple, there were different courts, but everyone had a place. And this woman, nameless, was right there worshiping with men and women and children all alike. Much like when we gather, we're all here. Yes, we bring our own elements. Sometimes we may feel a little differently abled on that day, but the table is wide open. But the challenge is we still live in a world of ableism. Even in 1990, when the Americans Disability Act was passed, there were many church leaders who opposed it as an unnecessary burden upon churches. Some even said, this is not good stewardship to build a ramp for just one person. But part of the story that reminds me why I am so grateful to be a minister in the United Church of Christ, and that we all should be grateful for part of our legacy, is the Reverend Wilkie was one of the people that pushed so hard for this act. He was there in 1990 when President George Bush, the one who followed Reagan, signed the American Disabilities Act, and he gave a pen to Harold Wilkie, and he picked it up with his toes because he had no arms. This is part of our legacy, but it's not something for us to just rest our morals upon that isn't this great and that we helped, through him, lead the way in. 2 years ago, in a survey in the United States, it revealed that 67% of the citizens and those who participated found it uncomfortable to talk with someone with a disability. Some would say, well, it's just hard for me to look upon their pain. Some would say, I just don't know how to talk to someone like that. And some of that story also went to explore if you knew all this other stuff about the person and you had not witnessed such ability, what would you think if they had a PhD? What if they were one of the most eloquent speakers? And folks would say, oh, I've never considered it this way. As I mentioned earlier, when Amy Kinney wrote her book, My Body's Not a Prayer Request, she talks about, in her opening chapter, our prayer perpetrators. For those who come up in some churches on Sunday morning or on the street who says, I am praying for you that Jesus' death on the cross and his woundedness will make you whole. For Jesus didn't die for you to be the way you are right now. She said at first in her life, she would just bite her tongue, put her fingernails into her palm so hard that even her cuticles hurt. But then she began to speak up at times, only to be told that she's being a bit too sensitive. I didn't mean it that way. But you see, the thing is, we have to see the world differently. We have to remember that there is no such thing as normal. For we're all a little bit different. We're all a little bit quirky. We all have our own gait or our own role, and we all live as God's children. What I love about the story of this woman is she was just like us, all gathered in a place of worship. But for many, and when I say Christians, I don't mean everyone sitting here, but it can be us too at times, is that we forget that we make the world a bit more inaccessible because we think this is normal. But we see it everywhere. Perhaps you go to the theater, and if you're in a wheelchair, you get the grand pleasure of sitting in the very back where they have made room. Or it could be you have to work much harder to get in. As Amy says in her book, while visiting Disneyland, she got a pass that would allow her to get ahead of the line or sometimes takes an alternative route. One was she could go in backwards because it was much easier to get on the ride as people exited than waiting in the long line but she also would take an elevator up to that platform. And someone she didn't even know did not believe that she truly could be in a wheelchair. Because, well, you don't look like it. With someone with that such a good smile, there's no way that you can smile and be that way. But there is a problem. Sometimes it's that when we take the biblical record and the problematic nature of some of the readings, women have become generally acknowledged in some places, but the degrading implications, the impact, the looks of those who have a different living experience than us are cast into the evil one. Now, what I loved about the part of the first reading this morning is the Revised Standard Version puts it as a spirit of infirmity. Most other translations calls it a spirit of Satan and spirit of evil one, that if you would just give it up, you could too be cured. And that's where the rub is. We often get cured and healing all mixed up. For I certainly believe that even this woman who appears to have been cured that day, we know that there are so many others then as now who have prayed for cures and it never comes. But they have found healing in a wheelchair, healing in a walker, even healing to know that God created them not to live in pain, but to represent who they truly are. That they're no different than those of us who think we're most able-bodied. Dosa Carlson, she wrote the last hymn we're going to sing today, actually, was one who also lived with a differing ability. And she says the following: I don't ponder what my life would have been like without a disability because it's a natural part of me. We are of value just because we are. We have our being, and we too, like everyone else, can respond to God's love and hope. This is where we are, that we are in a time where we know God calls anyone to be pastors, calls people to do all kinds of things. The question is, are we going to view what we believe as normal or welcome the true creation of God? For those who have differing abilities, they too can visit in homes. They too can make hospital visits. They too can live a normal life and be part of the people of God and even God's servants leading in congregations. My friends, let us not be the religious authority who claims that healing can only happen on certain days, but we dare not on the Sabbath or on our Sundays say Sundays have to be normal, because we know that a normal Sunday, at least around here, is one where everyone can rejoice, as the entire congregation gathered in that synagogue rejoiced in the healing that was happening for them too, as this woman and others were already welcomed into community. Amen.